This is the second week we're spending in what's called the Farewell Discourse, Jesus' 5 chapters of parting words to the disciples in the Gospel of John. As you might remember, John, more so than the other 3 Gospels, emphasizes this part of the story. I knew this text was coming, and I'll confess to you, it stressed me out a little bit. It's really similar to last week, and it's kind of confusing, actually. Here's what I mean. This bit's from last week. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. The one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. Maybe you notice similar language today. You will know I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. See what I mean? They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. How do you preach that? This is the vibe or tone, whichever words you want to use, for chapters 14 through 17 for the Farewell Discourse. I think I said this last week, but the preacher faces the challenge of expounding on this text, which he or she knows is central to our doctrine, to our faith, crucial to our understanding of who God is, and yet is at the same time a mouthful. Difficult to understand, let alone explain. When I'm in this situation, I tend to slow down, zoom out, go back to the basics. And so I said, okay, deep breath, Phil, you can do it. Let's look at the context here. Jesus is with his disciples, and he needs to comfort them, and he needs to prepare them for the future. The fact is, Jesus, as they know him, as an embodied person, that is, will soon leave. First through the death on the cross, but he'll come back for a period of time. But even after that, he'll ascend into heaven. And so in a very real way, he'll be gone forever. It's hard to blame the disciples for viewing this as the end. They are grieving and they're disappointed. On top of that, their vision of salvation is obviously wrong. It dies with Jesus on the cross. They're going to have to undergo a transition into a new understanding. I think transition is a key concept here. A transition from Jesus, the human, walking alongside them, to a Jesus they cannot see or hear in the same way. A transition from witnessing Jesus' saving acts to having to be the actors themselves. A transition from a hope that Jesus will free Israel from Roman rule to an acceptance that Jesus rules a different kind of kingdom. There is a friendship element to this, and there is a practical element to this. Jesus wants to comfort his friends, his brothers whom he loves, but he also wants to rid them of their delusions. He needs them to understand that this, in fact, is not the end, And there is still more work to be done. And though it feels like he's leaving, he's not. They've got to transition toward this new way. I just finished a novel called Lazar, and it's one of those like generational novels where it looks at 3 different generations of a family. In this case, it's a Hungarian family. Their last name is Lazar, and they are noblemen. They are aristocrats. It takes place in the early 20th century, so over 3 generations, say, portions of each generation, so half a century, and you can think about what happened in that part of the world in the first half of the 20th century. Lots of transitions. The fall of the Habsburg monarchy, 2 world wars. I didn't know very much about Hungary. I guess I hadn't thought much about Hungary. But during the Second World War, the Hungarian government and the Nazis kind of collaborate. And so the noble people are faced with this, everyone, I guess, is faced with this dilemma of, are they willing to pledge their allegiance to the Nazis? After that, after the war, I'm not sure I understood how all of this worked, but the Soviets take over that area and they bring in communism. And so there's this period of what's called expropriation. Do you guys know that word, expropriation? It's when the state comes in and takes all your stuff, nearly all their assets. And so these people who were accustomed to being aristocrats, they had a whole estate, they had servants, they always had the finest food and the finest wine. That was their life, that was their identity, that's what they were accustomed to. All of that is taken away, and they are forced to work in the fields alongside people they used to consider peasants. And so they are facing this really, unexpected, shocking, for them, tragic situation. For some of them, they just lose hope altogether. Others have this kind of delusion that things are still like they were. They still think of themselves as somehow better than the people working alongside them. They try to order them around. But it just seems foolish because nobody has anything. I underlined a sentence in the book. Even those who had not lost hope were not, in fact, hoping for the future, but the return of the past. What's it like to lose everything? How does one make a transition like that? Technically, the farewell discourse begins in chapter 14. That's to say, that's when Jesus begins the discourse itself. But chapter 13 is when this final gathering commences. Do you remember what happens in John 13? That's the foot washing chapter. So Jesus humbles himself. He's got his basin full of water. He's got the towel over his shoulder, and he starts to wash the disciples' feet. And he washes a couple of them, and then he gets to Peter. Do you remember what Peter says? Peter says, "You will never wash my feet." And I'm reading this, and I can sort of picture Jesus, I don't want to say rolling his eyes, but there's Peter again being Peter. And, what's going on in Peter's head? Maybe he wants to distinguish himself among the disciples. Maybe this act will make him appear holier than them. Maybe it's an issue of self-worth. Maybe he actually doesn't think he's worthy of having his feet washed? Well, Jesus explains to him, look, Peter, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. In other words, this is something we're all doing together right now. So how about you just let me wash your feet? And Peter, recognizing his error, you remember what he does? He overcorrects. And he says, oh, you do want me to allow you to wash my feet? Well, wash my hands and my head too. And I'm just like, Peter, pump the brakes, man. You know? Jesus explains, well, there's a reason it's just the feet. The point of all of this, Peter cannot let go of his own delusion, his own understanding of what's going on. His ego stands in the way at every turn. All Peter needs to do is listen. All Peter needs to do is to be open to this act of grace that is happening in his midst. But he cannot get out of his own way. Why can he not just be open to God's action? One preacher and scholar, Mandy England Cole, distilled the farewell discourse into what she calls 2 core messages for the disciples. The first is the great commandment. He commands them to love each other just as Jesus has loved them. The second core message is a promise, which is that even when Jesus dies and departs from this world, the disciples will not be alone. If you look throughout the farewell discourse, those chapters 14 through 17, you'll see that the Pastor Cole is right about those being the 2 core messages. So in a passage that sometimes has confusing languages, that distillation was very helpful to me, and maybe it will be helpful to you too. We already talked about how 13 is the embodiment of that love commandment. 14, maybe you remember last week, I am the way and the truth and the life. If you know me, you will know my Father also. In other words, even after I'm gone, you're not alone. You know God. God is in your heart. God is with you. Today's text is the explicit promise that the advocate will be with them, that the Holy Spirit will be with us. 15 is, I am the true vine, this awesome expression of the interconnectedness of the Father and the Son and the Spirit and creation. God is with us. He'll say things like, when you do the commandments, you are doing my will, you are doing the work of the Father. Like, God is not far off and distant. God is with us. And in following His teachings, especially in following the great commandment, we are connected to God. So, how are the disciples to face this coming transition when Jesus will not be with them in person? They are to love each other, and fair to say, love others as Jesus has loved them, and they are to understand that they're not alone. These 2 core messages are not new. They are central in the Old Testament as well. You remember Jacob? There's this story where Jacob and his brother Esau are in this really bad fight. I mean, really bad. Esau tries to kill him, and Jacob's running away, and it's kind of his fault too. Like he was not the best brother and he stole Esau's birthright. And so this is all very tiring for him. And he lays down on a rock and he has this dream. It's the Jacob's ladder story, and there's this ladder in which angels are ascending and descending between heaven and earth. It's this image of God being among us, and this inseparability of God's kingdom and of God's creation. And if that is not enough, God even speaks to Jacob directly after he wakes up and gives this promise: know that I will be with you wherever you go. The Old Testament law is chock full of iterations of the Great Commandment. The Shema, that Jewish creedal statement found in the book of Deuteronomy, includes, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and with all your might. In the book of Leviticus, we have God says, be holy as I am holy. This theme of emulating God's holiness and God's loving action in the world. This has been there from the very start. And of course, the book of Leviticus includes, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You see, these two core messages are deeply ingrained in our tradition. They are written on our hearts. Maybe it's hard to empathize with the disciples in the upper room, taking in news like that, life-changing news, shocking news, settling into a harsh new reality. But the truth is, we face transitions all the time. As a nation, we face transitions. As the church, we face transitions. As individuals, we face transitions. Things change. Life happens. We lose loved ones. Fundamental things we take for granted can disappear without notice. And our instinct, right? Here's the thing. Our instinct is going to be to rely on ourselves, on our own understanding. But why should we do that when God is with us? Why should we panic when we've known all along that love is the way? Amen.